So in this video, we'll cover a very important topic when it comes to single page applications, and that is the topic of state management. So when we speak of state management, we're speaking about managing the values stored in variables across the application. All right, the values of the variables across the applications. That's the state of the application. So you can have state within a single function. As it relates to view, you can have state within a single component. All right. So, for example, the ref, the constant variables you create within the component, the value of its properties. Those are our aspects of state. View router can have state in terms of the path. All right. So you have state all over the application. But one challenge is, how do you share state across multiple components? Well, one way of doing that is to use props, right? There are other ways of doing it in Vue 3, right? Another thing is, how do you share state across pages? Well, one way to do that is to use the router or use some higher level component that can store that global state. All right. Now, in order to provide a consistent way of managing state across the application, Vue provides a global state management tool known as Pinia. Right? Pinia replaces Vuex, which is the older version. But essentially, in very basically, right? Let's say I have a website. All right. By the way, this is the entire website that I'm showing here, including this is a website, right? And on that website, I have a component, right? Let's say this is a page. Let's say it's a table, for example, right? Let's say it's a table of users, right? And this displays a table of users. Then on that same site, I have another page, different URL, or different path, right? And on that page, I have a form. And what I want is, when I enter data into this form, and I go back to the table page, I should see what I entered into the form, right? So View Router, what it really does, it allows us to have a global state, a state where all of our components can access. As a result, we can use that to share large amounts of data across our entire application. And that's what we're going to be looking at here, all right? So this is the tool, Pinia. It's pinia.vuejs.org. And in order to create a Vuetify project using this tool, we say npm create Vuetify. All right, and we'll give this project a name. We want to come down here to essentials. We're not using TypeScript, we're using npm, and it's going to go ahead and install those dependencies for us. This will then generate the initial uh, project that we will then manipulate. All right. So let me find the table as we are beginning. All right. Here are the tables: list, dialogues, navigation. All right, data tables. Good. So this is finished. We then go into the project folder and we open this in Visual Studio Code. And from there, we run the project. All right, it's on localhost port 3000. So this should be our initial project. Good. So here we have our initial project. Of course, we'll have to make some changes here because this is not what we want, right? So the first thing is let's set up the project, the structure where we have two components here, one with a table, one with a form, right? So the first thing I would want to do is to remove all the things that we won't use, right? We'll keep this project simple. So we'll delete the layout folder entirely. We will then delete the component since we don't want that component. Um, I would like to rename this home view, or yeah, let's rename this home view. And we'll have to replace this because we no longer have that home page, that hello world, sorry, component. This is no longer here. Come to our router. This is what our router looks like. But I don't want to use this structure. Get rid of all this and leave it as component. We then need to do import on the home view. Import here. We want to import home view, and here we use home. Save, and this should work. Perfect. There's a home view that is being displayed by this text here, right? So let's continue. So let's create a component that has a table. Let's call this users table.view template. I'll just put the usual setup just for testing purposes. You just want to make sure that once you create it, it's working, right? Good. Then we need to import the table into the home view. Import users table. And I will now add another div here. Well, sorry, we need one div. Let's use a v container, and then a v dash row since we're using Beautify. And then let's drop this in one row. Then let's use a different row for the users table. Right? Good. So that works. V dash call. Mhm. 12, which would mean the entire page. All right, good. And we can probably put this one in a similar column. All right. Let's see what's over this side. Uh, what's this space? So here we have the div, the column, the row, the row. Okay, okay, it's okay, the container. All right, good. Now let's edit this component to include the table. So I'm going to remove this and let's just include the table there. So the logic for the table can be found at can be found here. We have data tables, we have guide, basic, data, a basic table. Let's see the logic for this, and we have uh, data table serve. Oh no, that's not what we want. We're looking for a virtual. Let's see. All right, so this is what we want. We want this basic table here, v dash data table, with the headers, the items, and so on. Right, and this is a script for that. But now this is using the options API, not the composition API in this documentation. But that's fine. So let's go ahead and create our table. So I'm going to copy this code. For obvious reason, this is going to work, but that's fine. And let me just format this a bit. Now I'm going to get rid of these two items since that's not necessary. We're just looking at the headers. Of course, this isn't going to work because this variable, no, this one doesn't exist in our component, right? So yeah, right? It's not going to work. We don't actually see any table columns, right? This is a structure now for the headers here. So we can come to this and we can say constant headers is equal to that. All right. And just for testing purposes, we come back here to make sure it's working. Good. But obviously those are not the headers that we're looking for. So we can get rid of these. And we'll just put simple things as for ours, right? We'll have a title called first name. We'll have another one called last name. And we'll have another one called email address. Just email. We'll do the save and we should just have 3 columns. Good. So that part is working perfectly fine. All right. Now, what we want is on a separate page to have a form such that once we enter data into that form and we navigate back to this page, that data from the form is still available on this page, right? So let's us do that. So therefore, we need to create the other page, and let's call that page user create. We're not being very creative. Uh, so user create view template. Again, this is just to make sure that it's working. So we created the new view. We come here, set up. All right. Now we add this to the router. We come here, we do our import user create view. We then add another route. Oops. And on that route, let's say we want it's the we need to go to create and so / create should load the other route. All right. So let's see if that works. / create. Right. Works perfectly fine. Next. So this is functional. Now let's add a component for that file. We're going to create a component called user create. Then we're going to add that to the template, add a div, and we say user create. All right. So we're just creating the blank, the basic components here. Good. We then add the script section. It's set up. All right. Now we need to import user create in user create view. Import user create from at components slash user create.view. And then here I'll do div. Then I'll say user create like that. And I'll add this right in here. So we should see this followed by the content of this component, which is that. So both of them should be printed. All right, so we know it's working. Now let's go ahead and create the same. Now that that's working, let's go ahead and create the same container structure that I had for the others. V container, then if dash row, and if dash call with calls equal 12. This goes in there. And this one goes in here. Good. And it's still working. So everything here is fine. Wonderful. Now we need to add a form to this field, to this table. Sorry, to this, replace this with the form. Come to Viewtify. We come to where it forms. All right. Since this already has this has validation, right? Right. We're not interested in forms validation, so let's do rows. All right. Well, we just need to do. Oh, look, it's right here now. This is what I'm looking for. So we'll copy this entire form. I'm not too sure I want a horizontal form anyway. Don't want a horizontal form. Let's create our own. So it's v-form. Then we need the input field. We need a text field for each form, right? So we're going to paste that in. We aren't interested in any of this or any of this. All right, pull that back. Right now, we aren't interested in the V model. We just want to see a very basic form here. Let's hope this runs well. It doesn't mean we have any bugs. Good. We have our form here. Wonderful. All right. If we want this to take up less space, like I said before in the previous video, we can do something like that. And I think there's something called offset. And we can offset this by 4. Right? Good. So let's come back to our form. I'm going to add 2 other fields. This one is going to be last name. And we'll have this one as email. All right. So there, 1, 2, 3. We just need a button now. v-btn. We call this submit. Wonderful. So when this button is clicked, we will read what was entered there. All right. Now we need V models to actually store the data that's entered into the form. So we say constant Let's just call this USR, user, is equal to ref, and we have an object. We have first name, that's blank. We have last name, that's blank. And we have email, that's blank, right? So that's the initial structure. We need to import that ref. So it's import ref from view. And then here we need to say v-model user-first name. So that field is connected to the first name. This field here is connected to the last name. And this field here is connected to the email. Good. So once this is clicked, let's just make sure that we can actually read these values, right? So I want to set up a @click here, call it. So when it's clicked, a function called submit will be called. Just checking console.log user.value, and we open here, and we have to check console.log will print it to the terminal, to the console, right? Submit for messages. All right, let's see what's happening here. Messages, submit. Good. So there it is, right? So it's working. So far, so good. All right. So I think the final thing that we need is a way to toggle between the two pages, right? To move between the two pages of our website. Now, again, this is where the layout aspect comes in, but we're just going to use some basic buttons, and I'll add those buttons here. All right. There are different ways of creating that layout that will be that will be available across multiple pages. But in this case, we're just going to do a custom approach where we will do this to simplify your application. But if you're interested, you should look into how to use that layout folder. It's very useful. So we'll just be very basic here, and we'll create two buttons that you will click, sorry, two router link that you're going to click on. So router dash link to equal that, and we just have to put home here. So I want to make sure this works. So home, one, and then we do, in fact, let's just put table here instead of home. And then we do another one. This is create, and we put create here. Right? So these are, what do we have here? What's all this? Okay, something with the input field. That's fine. So we have the table, which is this one, and we have create, which is this one. All right. Good. So table, create. All right. Now what we want is that when we enter something here and we save, it appears in the table. Okay, so let's close down the things we won't need. The view, the home view. So we have the table and we have the form. All right. Let's see. Everything here seems to be working fine. This is where view router comes in. Sorry, view state management comes in. So with Pinia, we come to get started. And Pinia also supports both the composition and options API. All right. And like I said, it's used for global state management, all right, in Vue. So what we need to do, this is basically what it is. Here we have to get started, which includes how to install it. But we use a Verify project, and it came with it pre-installed. All right. So um, in this case, what we are going to do is to switch right to defining a store. All right. So here we are at defining a store. Now this covers how to define a store, and you can have multiple stores, right, in your application um, for different parts of the application. In this case, we'll just create one store, right? So you can name the return value defined or anything you want, but it's best to use the name of the store and to use and store. So example, use user store, use cart store. All right. Now, like I said, you can have multiple stores in your application. All right. But in our case, we're just going to be using one. All right. So if you're using the options API, if you want to use the options API, you can define a store this way. All right. The stores have state, getters, and actions. All right. The state is the state of the store. That is the actual values of the variables in the store. Getters, getters are uh, getters are methods that allow you to read as parts of the store, right? But the getter is really used when you want to read some data directly from the store and do some sort of transformation on it. All right. So in this case, the store has two variables or an object with two properties, count and name. We have a getter, which is a function that is called double count, and it multiplies the count value by 2. Actions are used for updating the store. All right, so if you want to update a value in the store, update some property, you use an action to that. We'll cover that in a bit. So you could also use a sort of a view compositions API syntax for defining the stores. So, like I said, you can also use a type of composition API if you define the store this way. But I'm not going to do this because this is an introductory session, all right? So let's start with the state, all right? So using the options API approach, all right? And another reason I'm doing that is because the tutorial has separate pages for that approach, all right? So you want to call define store, and that will create a store, right? The state can take a function. This is a function, and the return value of that function becomes the state that is available across the entire application, right? So we are not interested in all this TypeScript stuff, right? So let's begin. So here we have the store, all right? So in our case, let's give this title story. So here we have a store, all right? So what we will need to do in this project is to come to store, we come to index.js. So this is where it actually set up the store. And then we come to app.js and we can see our actual store. So as you can see, the store is called app, all right? The store here is called app, but the store is exported as use app store. So remember that this export means that when you import, you're going to import something called use app store, and this is the store that is going to be exported. Like I said before, you can name your stores anything, and you can export them as anything. These are just variables, all right? But in our case, we're going to keep this to a single uh, store for the entire application, all right? So to set up the state, as you can see, we have an object here, all right? This is just a JavaScript syntax for a function that returns an object, right? There's a lot of syntax that you can use. In this case, we want to have users, right? So we can define it like this, an array, all right? Of course, you can add other properties to this, right? You can have other properties here with different values. But in our context, we only want one, just users. And every time we create a user, we're going to add it to this array, right? Good. So that's the first thing. And that's the state, right? That syntax and this syntax, they both do the same thing. It's just that the one that we have uses a parentheses around curly brackets. So we don't have to use this return statement and the inner curly brackets. It's just the variation of the same JavaScript syntax, all right? Now, what we need to do is how do we then access that state outside of the store that defined it? Well, the way we do that is by importing this in our component. In our case, let's import that inside of our form, right? So what we're going to do, we say import. We have to say use, I think it's app store, I think it is, from, and that's going to be, this should be store, right? At the top here, we then, let's see if this works. It's defined but never used, that's fine. We then say constant. I'll just call it user store because it's storing the users, is equal to use app store function call, and good. And there should be, and that should be sufficient. Now what I probably want to do is to maybe add a div just below there to see what that store actually has. Or maybe we should have logged it, right? So we have an error. User store error importing module, non-existing modules, does not provide an export named use app store. Okay. All right. So let's see here. This is in the app.js. This is exported. Let's see what we have here. Let's make sure that this is actually configured. I think it is here, right? Because this is imported. Good. So that part works. And let's see why our store itself isn't operational. Why is this in app.js? All right, one moment. Let's just make sure that Beautify didn't make any errors. So once we do this in create, we have that. We then have that. We have to make sure that we do use there. All right. So let's make sure that that's in our program. So in our case, we have store, we have index.js, we have this, we are exporting to create, and we have this, which then brings it in here and it adds the use, and in main, this is called. So that part works, right? So we have this part done. So if you're using view 2, well, we're not using view 2. All right, good. Now let's see. So once we have that defined here. We have our store, all right? From within our component, we then say store slash counter. This file is called counter.js, which means our import is incorrect in this file, and this should, I believe, be /app.js, right? So what it's doing, it's creating a separate JS file for each store. So let's see what we have here. As you can see, it worked. All right, good. So this is our store. All right. So what's happening here is that within the store folder, we have a separate JS file for each store. All right. In our case, our store is called app, so we're calling our file app. Again, you don't have to do that, and you can have multiple stores, but in our case, we're just using one store. And to keep things consistent across this application, you should probably call this App Store instead of users. All right, App Store. So it's a store for the entire application, and as you can see, that works. So the users part of the store is empty. Good. So if we come back to the documentation, we come to state, and this import here allows us to access the store. All right. Now, now, um, in the same way we're accessing the store here, we can access the store in JavaScript. All right. So what I want to do is to do the just app store dot users, right? Because it should have this dot push, and then we push in a copy of the user form or a copy of what's in the user form. All right, and let's see if this is going to work. So let's fill this up, some stuff there, hit submit. So it passed in null. That's a mistake. This is supposed to be dot value. So let's see if that works. So pass in some information here, that submit, and I'm seeing, okay, the reason the first one is null is because that's for what's from the previous run, right? So let's refresh, right? So as you can see, it's added and it's now globally available in the store. Now, View DevTools should have, click on this pineapple, and you can see the users array, and you can see the data there that's in the store, right? So because of that, I'll get rid of this. So it is in the store. Now, if I refresh this page, the store data goes away. Right? It doesn't survive a page refresh, all right? But as you can see, this information is now globally available, all right? Now, I can then load this same information now in lw@gmail.com, right? And as you can see, another one is added. Now, this store information can be accessed from any application, all right? So, so for any component within the application. So let's come now to the home component, the one that has a table, and load the store into the table, all right? So we come here, and from this setup, we can simply say import. I think it's called use app store from store.app.js. You say constant app store is equal to use app store. Wonderful. And then we should be able to say that items from the table is mapped to app store dot users. And as you can see, that works. All right. And if you come here, submit, we then come back to table and it's added there, right? So that's how you can use this global store to share data between components. The way you do this is that you put the data in the store in one component, and then that data is globally accessible across all components in the application, allowing to share data across components in the Vue application, right? Now, so that's the state. Now you can also use getters, right? So getters are getters are a way of um, providing doing computations on the stores that on the values of the stores, particularly when the store changes. You want to do some property in the store changes, you want to do some computation, you can use a getter for that. And this is the syntax for that. All right. So if you want to do some computation on the store, when the store changes, then you can use a getter. You simply, in addition to the state, you add a new one called getter and you provide functions to those, right? Um, and the way you access them in the store is quite simple. You import the store the same way, and you simply say store and then the name of the getter function, right? So you access getters in the same way that you access aspect of the state. However, you don't update the getter. So for example, we are updating this property users by pushing a new value to the array there. All right. Now, if you want to um, add change the value of a store, all right, you can use actions. All right. So what actions do is that this is a way of providing methods to the store that can change um, that can mutate the store. So we've mutated the store, the state of the store, directly through the state array. All right. Another way to do this is to mutate that through actions, which are just methods that can access that state. All right. And these methods can accept parameters. All right. So let's, in this case, for example, you want to register a user. You pass in the login and the username and the login and the password, and this does an HTTP request. All right. And once the request is complete, it then stores the user's data in the store. All right. So you can actually provide methods that will execute when you call them on the store. And these don't simply have to take inputs and just update the store. You can put entire computations um, in there. All right. Um, that is about it for the basic introduction to the view state management. In terms of how you can use it in the most basic format, you simply need to set up the store using just a state. Remember to import the store, and remember that you can then mutate the store variables like any other variable. Notice in this case, we don't have to use a dot value here, all right? And then you can also read that value out like any other variable. All right, so that should give you enough information to use global state management in your projects.